Once upon a table there was a spoon. A teaspoon, in fact. Now, this teaspoon was very proud of her place on the table. She delighted in her ability to measure out the exact amount of sugar to drop into the grandmother's cup of tea. And she loved the way her concave scoop made the perfect swirling eddies in that tea to mix the sugar in thoroughly. She was content with her role in life and happy to be of service. Until one day she was set next to a wicked steak knife. She turned to him and said, "Hi, I don't think we've met." And he sneered at her and said, "Well, no wonder. Look at you, so small and round and blunt. What good are you?" "Well, I'm a teaspoon," she said, and she explained about how she measured out the sugar and stirred the tea, and as for being small, I'm quite happy to be dainty. Dainty? Pah! With that bulging protrusion of yours, you don't even lie flat on the table like a proper piece of silverware. Your hump makes you all wobbly and unstable." And he turned away and began eyeing up the butter knife. The teaspoon was cut to the quick. No one had ever spoken to her that way before, and no one had ever suggested she had a negative side. She was always so pleased about what she could do, she never thought about what she couldn't do, or what she did badly. But now, every time she was dipped into the sugar bowl, she didn't think about the sweet crystals she was scooping up, but about the ones she was thrusting aside, with her hump. And when she stirred the tea, she began to worry that her convex side was creating counter eddies that would cancel out the good eddies from her concave side. And the final straw came when one night she was set in front of the young son of the house, and he accidentally put his water glass down on her tip, and she went flipping up into the air and sailed end over end across the table to land in the grandmother's mashed potatoes. How undignified, and decidedly undainty. So she went to the steak knife and said, "You were right, but what can I do? How do I get rid of this awful protrusion?" And he said, "Well, I'm sometimes taken to the basement to be sharpened. There's a grinder down there, and I suppose he could remove that hump of yours for you." So that very night she crept down to the basement, found the grinder, and asked him to help her. "Well, I will," he said. "If you'll help me, I'm in desperate need of some oil." So the teaspoon found the can of oil, pried the lid off, scooped out some of the liquid, and brought it back to the grinder and poured it just where it was needed. She thought, "Let's see the steak knife do that." "Well, thank you very much," he said. "Now, what can I do you for?" And so she showed him her hump and said that she would do anything to get rid of it. "Well, how much you want to take off?" he asked. "All of it," she said. "Well, that's your business. I can help you, but you're going to have to hold very still, and it might hurt a bit." The teaspoon nodded bravely and moved closer, and he began to grind away the metal on her reverse side. And it did hurt incredibly, and she flinched to see those little specks of silver flying off. But she yearned to be free of that pushy, protruding, unstable side of herself, and so she took a deep breath and held still. And after a while it all went numb, and she didn't feel it at all anymore. "Well, that's it, you're done," he said, and she thanked him and went rushing back upstairs, feeling lighter both physically and emotionally. She was so eager to test out her new stability that she lay down on the table and tried rocking back and forth. Nothing. She was as stable as any steak knife, not about to go flipping through the air. She was so relieved she fell asleep right there on the table. The next morning she awakened to find herself being picked up by the grandmother and dipped into the sugar bowl. This was the crucial test of her new self, and she passed. She slid into that heap of sugar, barely disturbing a single grain. But her success and her happiness were short-lived. As she was lifted up, she felt the sugar slide right through her. She couldn't hold on to any of it. And then she was dunked into the teacup and stirred around, but the liquid hardly made a ripple, let alone an eddy. She didn't know what was going on. And then she felt herself being plucked out of the teacup and carried into the kitchen and thrown on the countertop as the grandmother dug through the silverware drawer for another spoon and took it back to the dining room. Well, the teaspoon was bewildered. Everything was just starting to go perfectly, and then it all fell apart. She hoped nobody had seen. She looked around, but she was the only one on the countertop. And then she caught sight of her reflection in the chrome side of the toaster. What she saw was a thin rim of silver around where her scoop used to be, with nothing inside of it but air. And as she turned back and forth, she realized what she had done. She saw that her negative side and her positive side were just two halves of the same shape, and that by getting rid of one, she had destroyed the other. The teaspoon was crushed. What good was a spoon without a scoop? Was a spoon really still a spoon if it couldn't lift and hold things? No, she decided, it wasn't. And what was left for a spoon who wasn't a spoon? Nothing. She decided to end it all. She dragged herself over to the sink and stared down at the tub of hot, soapy water sitting there, and then she hurled herself in. Well, no sooner had she hit bottom than she was fished out by the father, who was doing the breakfast dishes. She was lifted up in front of his face and turned back and forth, and then she felt a breeze blowing through her, and out in front of her appeared a thin, shiny, delicate bubble that floated off over the sink until it bumped into the wall and popped. And then she felt herself being dropped into a cup with some soapy water poured on top and handed to the man's son. The boy carried her out into the sunshine, held her up in the bright air, and blew. And from the empty space within her came streams of shining bubbles that floated up and out into the world.